I said pause, and then I hit stop, which wasn't very smart. But there you go. I got 12 for back, 2 for neck, 5 for knee, 2 hand, 2 wrist, 4 shoulder, 1 elbow, and 2 hip. I summed them, so the sum of the frequencies is 30. And then I did my relative frequency. You can do it as a fraction or as a decimal. It's actually very helpful to have both. So don't forget, if you do a fraction, though, 12 over 30. So that's the sum of that's the frequency of the category 12 over the sum of all frequencies, which is 30. Simplify that fraction to 2/5, and that gave me 0.4. So don't forget that once you've got all your relative frequencies, if you sum them, they should sum to 1. Because of rounding, it's possible that you've got 0.999 or something like that, but the idea is that your relative frequencies sum to 1. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that information and we're going to display the information in graphs. And so the first graph that we're going to look at, if you remember, is constructing a bar graph. A frequency bar graph or a relative frequency bar graph. They are going to turn out looking the same. The only difference, and this is the most important thing I think with bar graphs, is figuring out exactly how to scale these things. So the first thing we need to do is determine what goes where. Your frequency or your relative frequency is always going to go on the y-axis. So for your frequency bar graph, remember what it said about our definition of frequency? That's the number of times the category appears. So in this case, we'll call it the number of patients that received that treatment. So I'll say number of patients. And then down here on the bottom, it's going to be type of rehab. Now, because this is just qualitative data, the x-axis, I don't really need a scale because it's qualitative and it's just going to have the names. But on the y-axis, I've got a scale. Because it goes up to 12, we need to make sure that we can go to 12. I think we can count by ones and still get to 12. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now, when you draw a bar graph, remember that bar graph, the bars touch. So our first category was back, and the back was 12. So I'm going to leave just a little space at the beginning, and I'm going to do my back. I'm going to label inside of my bar, that way I don't have to color it in. Back was 12. My second category that I had on my chart was neck. And when you're doing a bar graph, a regular bar graph, you do not have to put the bars in any specific order. I'm putting them in the order that they were on my chart. And after neck was knee, and knee had 5. After knee was hand and then wrist, and both of those had 2. So they're the same size as neck, and a wrist. And after hand and wrist came shoulder. Shoulder had 4. And then then elbow. Elbow just had 1. And then lastly came hip. And hip had 2, just like many of the others. Make sure it's all labeled, so on and so forth. You've done enough bar graphs in your lifetime. I think you got the hang of that. So let's talk about the relative frequency bar graph. The bars should end up looking exactly the same. Still type of rehab down here on the x-axis. It's qualitative, so I don't need a scale. But on the y-axis, this is where it gets a little bit crazy. This would be the frequency of the patients, or you could even say the percentage of patients that receive that type of rehab, because relative frequency is a percentage. So now when I'm going to scale, I'm going to look at my, there's my other one. I'm going to look at my relative frequencies and figure out how to scale. So my largest frequency is 0.40, and my smallest is 0.033. So I need to scale by something kind of small. I could maybe scale by 0.05, 0.02 maybe, but that would probably be hard to get to 0.40. I think I'm going to scale by 0.03. So I mean, that's kind of a weird scale, but because I have 0.03 and then 0.06, I think 0.03s might be maybe a little bit easier scale. So that's 0.03, which makes that 0.06, 0.09. So 0.12, 0.15, 0.18, 0.21, 0.24, 0.27, 0.30, 0.33, 0.36, 0.39, 0.42, 0.45. So that made sure that it got high enough. I know that's kind of hard to see. Oh, I can zoom in a little bit. See if you can see it. There you go. All right. So back, if you look at your back percentage, it was 0.40. So my back bar, if I go up to 0.40, that's going to be right about here. Oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. Just pretend that looks good. And the next one is neck, and that's 0.67. So let's see, 0.67 is going to be right about here somewhere. And then knee was 0.167, so that would be like right here. And you can see as I'm starting to do it that it is going to turn out to look just exactly like the other one. It's just my scaling is different. So I hope you remember that about bar graphs. And real quick, we'll go ahead and do a Pareto chart and a relative Pareto chart because they're also bar graphs. They're drawn in decreasing order of frequency. So I'm using the exact same information, but this time I am going to put the data in order. Another thing about Pareto charts is that Pareto charts are never really used for qualitative data. For quantitative data. They're always used for qualitative data. And so most of the time, Pareto charts, they don't connect them. They don't put them next to one another. They usually leave a space between them. So for this Pareto chart, I could scale it just like I scaled the ones up here. So I could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And my first graph, my first bar will be back because that's the one that's at 12. And then I'm going to leave a space before I put my next one, which happens to be knee. And knee has, 6, 5. So this is knee. And then after knee comes shoulder. And shoulder has 4. After shoulder, then I have 4 different categories that all have 2 each. So I have neck, hand, wrist, and hip. So when you happen to have the same amount of value and you need to put them in descending order, you put them in alphabetical order as they descend. So in this case, that should be hand, hip, neck, wrist. And they all have 2. So you would say hand, hip, and yes, you need to label these, neck, and wrist, and then the last one was elbow, and that one had 1. So I would go back through and put all the labels on them. This is hand, hip, neck, wrist, elbow. This was back, shoulder, knee, or knee, shoulder, whatever, something like that. Anyway, there's your Pareto chart, and you'll have it labeled. So again, up here it would be number of patients, Down here it would be type of rehab, scale. So you would do the same thing for the relative frequency Pareto chart. It would just be scaled with decimals because you'd be talking frequency. All right, so I hope you remember that. I'm going to turn off this video and we'll do one more. That is our pie chart.